The country is crying out for leadership. Leadership that can unite us, leadership that brings us together. I look at the presidency as a very big job, and nobody will get it right every time. And I won't either. But I promise you this, I won't traffic in fear and division. I won't fan the flames of hate. I'll seek to heal the racial wounds that have long plagued our country, not use them for political gain. I'll do my job and I will take responsibility. I won't blame others. But I promise you, this job is not about me. It's about you. It's about us. To build a better future. That's what America does. We build the future. It may, in fact, be the most American thing to do. This is the United States of America. There's never been anything we've been unable to do when we set our mind to do it, and we've done it together.
Welcome, and thank you for joining this evening's Biden for President Roundtable. Please welcome our moderator, Don Cheadle, and Vice President Joe Biden.
Good evening, everyone. It is great to be with you, albeit virtually. We've come together this evening with the Vice President and some very exciting young people who will be inheriting the mantle, so to speak, and are the future of this country. And we've come together tonight to ask the Vice President some questions as we are all dealing with, obviously, the issues of today that are very pressing on our minds, what we're seeing happening in our streets, what we're seeing happening not only across the country, but across the world, and how it affects us, and what can we be doing in the future to move the conversation forward, to move the society forward. And with the Vice President, who is hopeful to be the next president, as are we, clearly he wants to hear from us and he wants to hear from you. So no further ado, I would just like to say welcome to all of you, and hello, Mr. Vice President. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you for doing this.
Yes, I'm glad to be doing it, and I'm glad that we could come together. I want to mostly get out of the way and let this esteemed panel that we have dig in and ask you the questions that they want to ask you, and really hear your guys back and forth, because we need that right now, very, very desperately. But I would just like to start off by asking you, who has seen all of these changes happen across many, many years. This is unfortunately a cyclical thing that we have seen, the institutionalized oppression that seems to somehow kind of abate in a way and then come back full force. And now that we are seeing these things with cameras, we see with video that instantaneously goes around the world, we can see a lot of the things that people in the Black community have been talking about for many, many years every day, unfortunately, and in these last several weeks, all too often. So in this environment, in this atmosphere, how do you keep optimistic? How are you looking forward to what we can do together and not looking backward toward the things that we have been unable to accomplish?
Well, you know, George Floyd's last words spoke to a nation where the color of your skin dictates the safety in your future. And it's long past time that these words have to be acted upon. Look, just let me make something clear. I'm a white man. I think I understand, but I can't feel it. I mean, I feel it, but I don't know what it's like to be a black man walking down the street and be accosted, be a black man walking down the street, be arrested, be a black man walking down the street, and God forbid something worse happen to me. You know, if we just let this wound scab over again, it's never going to heal. As I said, George Floyd's last words didn't die with him. They're echoing all across the country. And I think they speak on to a nation where you have over 108,000 people have lost their lives to a virus now. 40 million Americans have filed for over 40 million for unemployment. And a disproportionate number of the coronavirus cases and job losses are in the African American and Latino communities. As a matter of fact, Latino community even have a higher unemployment rate, lost jobs. The moment, it seems to me, it's a wake-up call for everybody, for all of us. And the moment I think has come for our nation to deal with this systemic racism, to deal with the growing economic inequity in our nation, and to deal with the denial of the promise of this nation for so many. Early in the week, I laid out initial steps I thought the Congress should take immediately as it related to police conduct. Outlaw chokeholds, stop transfer of weapons of war, meaning those Humvees and the rest, to dealing with up-armored vehicles to police departments, improve oversight and accountability, create a model use of force standard, because the country's crying out for leadership, and the President of the United States must be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And it's my commitment to all of you as a president, I'm going to lead on these issues and I'm going to listen. And let me just say, you asked why I'm optimistic still. I'm optimistic because one of the things I learned is that, you're not as old, but we're older, that I thought we had made enormous progress when we finally elected an African-American president. I thought things had really changed. But what I didn't realize is what the historian says is that it's a constant pull and tug in America. America is not a fairy tale. The Constitution is not a fairy tale. It's a constant struggle between good and evil as to who is going to prevail. And, I believe in my heart of hearts that we can overcome. And if we stand together and finally as one America, we're going to rise stronger than we were before. But here's the deal. You can never, I'm going on too long, I apologize. Let me just say
No,
this.
please,
this
this is what this is for.
One
Please.
of the things that I think is important is that I thought you could defeat hate. Excuse me. I thought you could defeat hate. You could kill hate. But the point is you can't. Hate only hides. And if you breathe any oxygen into that hate, it comes alive again. And the words of a president matter. And when I saw those folks, I hadn't planned on running for president again, Don, for real. But when I saw those folks coming out of the fields in Charlottesville, carrying those torches and chanting the same anti-Semitic bile they chanted in Nuremberg and in Berlin and in Germany, in the 30s. And then a young woman was killed there, accompanied by white supremacists. And the president was asked, what do you think? And he said something no president has ever said. He said there were fine people on both sides. Right. The point is, this is a constant struggle. We have to constantly fight it, though. As Martin Luther King talked, that arc does bend toward justice. But you gotta fight it. You gotta fight it. It will never be defeated. And this is a case where I think as we move as one, and I think the American people are ready to move, Black, white, Latino, Asian, I think they're ready to move. We can, in fact, push it back, and if we stay vigilant. I really am hopeful, especially with the generation of young people we're going to hear from today. Their generation is the most engaged, least prejudiced, most open, most well-educated generation in history. So I'm hopeful.
Correct. Well, I want to be hopeful too, and I'm hopeful, and I have kids too. They're 25 and 23, and we've all been in the streets together. We've been in these protests, and I am very proud of them. I hope they're proud of themselves that they have taken this on and understand that this is, as you say, a fight that will continue, and that you can't really ever take a day off or think that you finally arrived at some place. You have to constantly be vigilant and keep it moving. And in the interest of keeping it moving, I think I'm going to bring in our first panelist, our first panelist is Nyla Cobb. And I would just like to have her introduce herself, share her story, and ask whatever question she has of you, Mr. Vice President. Nyla, take it away.
Hey, Nyla.
Hello. I want to start off by saying thank you for inviting us to this town hall and giving us the opportunity to speak with you. Like you said, I'm Nyla Cobb. I'm a student at Temple University studying political science and public relations. I'm a digital organizer with the campaign and president of Temple Students for Biden. And I'm from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I've seen a shift within my community. Mr. Vice President, Black and Brown people are under attack in this country, currently and have been historically. We're disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 and the subsequent economic downturn. As a college student, I personally feel wronged by the current administration handling current administration's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. This was preventable, and we were all let down. The quarantine and the stress of it all, it has been maddening, not knowing if I would fall ill or losing someone that I love, and then the death of George Floyd. Mr. Vice President, in addition to this pandemic we're all facing, there's a great fight we've now been forced to meet head on in our communities across the country. As we've seen with these protests, people are fed up. What do you say to those who are extremely frustrated, who are calling for police reform and seeking justice for George Floyd, Miss Breonna Taylor, and for many others who have been victimized by an abuse of power carried out by the police in their communities?
I say I see you, I hear you, and I'm angry as well. But we have to turn our anguish into purpose and use this moment to finally drive real change to our laws and our institutions and our culture. You know, as I said, history teaches us that out of some of our darkest moments, we've made our greatest progress. Reverend Barber said it, I think, best. He said, in the morning, meaning when you mourn, we find hope. In the morning, we find hope. We need an era of action that reverses systemic racism, and it's long overdue, and with concrete changes. I can't wait until I'm president to get started. We have to urge right now, though, we have to move. We have to urge Congress to take action now. No excuses, no more delays. Outlaw chokeholds, stop transfers of weapons, I said, of destruction to police departments. Improve oversight and accountability. Create a model use force standard. As I said, within the first 100 days, I'm going to create a National Police Oversight Commission. And the vast majority of police are decent and honorable, Black and white and Latino. And they, in fact, are worried about the culture as well. I've long believed that we need real community policing, meaning that they have to get out of their vehicles, know the people in the communities. We need to review our hiring practices, our training practice, our de-escalation practices, and hold bad cops accountable. Hold bad cops accountable. We need economic justice as well. You know that as well as I do now. We have more to say. I'll have more to say this in the coming days, but to start, Congress must fix the racial disparity in the COVID recovery funds. Right now, those funds aren't going to the right place. We need to pay essential workers, not just praise them. We have to pay them, and they tend to be minorities. We have to protect and expand Obamacare. He's trying to get rid of it in the moment we need health care so badly. There's so much work to do, not just as in the presidency, but in my presidency, assuming I get elected, but in a generation. But I promise you, I'm going to lead and I'm going to listen. And what are some of the things that we have to do? Well, there's many things, but I think, let me conclude your question by saying that your generation has gotten a real kick in the teeth. I have two granddaughters. I had one who just graduated from law school. I have another granddaughter who's a rising senior in Philly as well. And I have a second granddaughter who's a rising sophomore. And this whole 9/11 generation all the way through the Z generation and the early millennials, from the time you got started, you've been in a position where the people who graduated 6 years before you graduated into a gigantic recession. They had great opportunities, but what happened? They didn't have access to the jobs. The jobs weren't there, no matter what your color, but particularly if you were an African American. And then now what's happening with this COVID crisis, as well as the fact that we have this incredible unemployment rate, what's happening now? I know my granddaughter had a great job out of law school. They told her, you can't come. You got to wait until March for things start. I mean, no graduations, be in a position where it just put your generation in a place where there's reason to be concerned and angry, well beyond, but including dealing with systemic racism. And I think the country's ready because the blinders have been kind of taken off and they've seen the people who have been carrying the rest of the country on their back have been what we now call essential workers. People in minority communities, people who are driving everything from disinfecting operating rooms to the nurses, to making sure that the grocery stores are open. They're not only the people who are carrying us in the back, they're the people dying. And people didn't know it before. They didn't know it before. So I think they're ready to deal with some of the systemic problems, starting with systemic racism. I really believe they're ready for us to move. I think we have a gigantic opportunity to create real opportunity in the next 4 years.
Well, something that's happened here in Los Angeles, the mayor has decided that he's going to reappropriate $150 million from the police department to communities of color that are suffering. And do you think moves like this, things like this, could be used across the country? Are you behind these kinds of programs?
The answer is, I know Eric. He's a first-rate. He's one of the co-chairs of my campaign, as a matter of fact. He's a first-rate mayor, and I think it makes sense. Some places they're short on having enough people to cover the community. Others, the police departments have a lot more than they need. And so it depends on the community, but it's all about treating people with dignity, just treating people with dignity, period. And setting down basic fundamental rules that relate to what constitutes adequate and fair police conduct. And that's what we have to focus on, in my view.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. And Nyla, thank you very much for your question. Next, we would like to hear from Ryan Wilson. Ryan is from Atlanta, Georgia. He's a small business owner. And I would like to hear his question as well. Ryan, take it away.
Mr. Vice President, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you, man.
As we've discussed, I'm from Atlanta, and I attribute a lot of my success to being from this city. I spent a little bit of time in D.C. I went to Georgetown for undergrad and for law school, but I eventually came back to Atlanta because I wanted to start a business that was centered around people, around community. I was inspired by another tragic incident in our country's history, the death of Trayvon Martin. And together with one of my college roommates from Georgetown, this business has flourished because of our focus on bringing people together. What's special about the Gathering Spot is that we're more than a space that tolerates Black folks, but really celebrates them. And so my question to you is this: if it's true that you can't truly lead people if you don't love people, how are you going to lead differently as the President of the United States, specifically for Black Americans?
Because I love people. You and I've been to your place twice for extended periods of time. And what you didn't say is it's not only African Americans. Look at all the white leaders you've attracted. Look at all the people you've attracted becoming part of a community, part of a larger community. I sat there, I don't know, I guess I was in your place maybe a total of 6-7 hours, total of 2 times, everything. And I watched. I went around to the tables. People were there. There were religious leaders, Black and white, using your place to gather. There were young entrepreneurs, Black and white and Asian, looking at your place to gather. It's about doing things together. And the fact is that, look, I have never found it to be the case where my judgment about someone, whether I care about them, has anything other than to do with their humanity. My dad used to have a single prayer. He said, Joey, everybody's entitled to be treated with dignity, no matter what the circumstance. I have no idea what it's like to be treated in a prejudiced way as a Black man. But I do know what it's like to be humiliated, because when I was a kid, I used to stutter a little like that. I'm used to bullies. I'm used to people who take advantage of people. I'm used to people who, in fact, just try to exert power for their own egotistical reasons. And so that's the part of me. In my household, you could never, ever, 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 ever say, you get in a fight with somebody, you could never say anything about them. It was true. You couldn't say if they were 300 pounds, you couldn't say you're fat. You couldn't say you're skinny. You couldn't say you're short. You could say if they're brilliant, you could say you're dumb. If they're what, but you could never say anything that they had nothing to do with having to have put upon themselves. And
that
so
must have made you a very creative sparrer, I guess. You had to come up with a lot of quick things to say that weren't true.
Yeah, you did. But all kidding aside, Don, I mean, if we ever turned and said something, if somebody was homely and they did something really mean and you said you're ugly, you'd be in real trouble in my house, for real. None of my kids, my grandkids, or any, it's a tradition in our family, because you know what it's like to be victimized. Not like I'm not equating it to being a Black man, but I'm equating it to realizing who it is you care about. Everybody. You know, I really do believe, I mean, I don't want to proselytize, but I do believe we're all God's children for real. I really believe that. And I believe we're all created equal. The problem is, are we all going to be treated equally? It's about being treated equally. The President of the United States must be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I'm not going to fan the flames of hate. I'm going to speak to heal racial differences. Look, let me conclude this by saying, and because I want to get in a larger conversation with everybody, conclude it by saying this. I think that if you think about it, the words of a president matter, no matter who the president is. A president of the United States can send a nation to war. It can bring peace. He or she can make the market go up or down. He can also he can encourage people to do bad things. What he or she says. How many of your friends do you know have children who, when the president comes on there, they pull them away from the TV? Right. Not a joke. Think about it. Think about it. So it really matters. It really matters. Hate didn't begin with Donald Trump. It's not going to end with him. The history of our country is not a fairy tale. It doesn't guarantee a happy ending. But as I said earlier, we're in a battle for the soul of this nation that has been a constant push and pull for over 200 years. I call every American to ask them the following question. Is this who we are, what we're seeing now? Is this who we want to be? Is this what would pass on to our kids and our grandkids? Mm-hmm. You know, I'll do my job and take responsibility, but I won't blame others. I'll never forget that the job isn't about me, it's about you. Is that how we teach our kids? I work not only to rebuild this nation, but to build it better, stronger, and more inclusive, more resilient than it really was. Look, if elected, my view is that we'll have to address these issues straight on. And the words the president says matter. So when a president stands up and divides people all the time, you're going to get the worst of us to come out, the worst in us all to come out. This president constantly talks about equality without lecturing, talks about and has administrations that looks like the country and the rest. It changes attitudes. And it's about the attitude of the country. Do we want our kids, do we really think this is as good as we can be as a nation? I don't think the vast majority of people think that. There are probably anywhere from 10 to 15% of the people out there that are just not very good people. But that's not who we are. The vast majority of the people are decent. We have to appeal to that, and we have to unite people, bring them together. Bring them together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. And also thank you, Ryan, for your question. I would like to move now to Jajori. Jajori Mackenzie Simmons is from Detroit, Michigan. He's an NAACP Youth Division board member. Jajori, what is your question for the Vice President?
Good evening, Vice President Biden. I am Jajori Mackenzie Simmons. I was born in St. Peter, Barbados, and came to the United States when I was 2 years old. I grew up in Saginaw, Michigan, and I'm a 2019 graduate of Howard University. Sir, I remember when you came to Saginaw, and some years after that visit, in 2012, my hometown witnessed the brutal killing of a Black man whom at the time was a vagrant. He posed no threat in the situation, and the police shot him 46 times, and no justice was served. His name, Mr. Vice President, was Milton Hall. That injustice sparked me to do something, and I joined the NAACP to be an advocate for equity and justice. That event also solidified my decision in attending an HBCU. In these times, my HBCU served as a sacred ground for healing, intellectual growth, and a space to further develop my identity as a Black man in this world. Education and job opportunities are important to Black youth. So I ask you, Mr. Vice President, what are your goals to sustain Black educational institutions, and how will you ensure that HBCUs are provided adequate federal funding?
Look, historic Black colleges and universities have done so much with so little. That's why I proposed for over a year, I'm going to invest $70 billion in HBCUs and minority-serving institutions. And I'm going to ease student debt crisis that particularly impacts now on African Americans. Historically, Black colleges and universities play a vital role in their communities and in the country. They educate more than their fair share of low-income and first-generation students. My state, Delaware State University, graduates nearly half of our state's black college students. And by the way, the president of Delaware State University used to work for me now. He was on my staff, and I encouraged him to move on, and he's now the president of Delaware State University. And I spent a lot of time at Howard, as you may know, at Howard University as well. We've done so much with so little, but severely under-resourced for much too long. Now, as president, I'm going to make sure HBCUs get the funds they deserve. Invest over $70 billion in research centers to tackle challenges from climate change to cancer, high-tech labs and facilities, internships and other programs for graduate students. Look, one of the things that happens is if you take a look at the state universities, the University of Michigan or whatever state university where an HBCU is, you take a look at them, the reason why they compete for billions of dollars in government contracts. And the government contracts to deal with major issues that relate to the future and training the best high-quality people and technology-savvy people in the world. So what we did, by the way, in our administration, we took money that we went down, for example, to deal with the whole issue of what we're going to do with with what's going on in terms of the illegal eavesdropping by the Chinese and the Russians and others on the American system, and how we're going to deal with it. So we went down and provided money to set up laboratories and to graduate people out of a HBCU near Roanoke, Virginia. And what are we doing? What are we doing that for? So they'll have an opportunity to have high-paying jobs when they get out in the sciences. University of Delaware does a lot of work. They have millions of dollars in contracts dealing with metallurgy to develop high-end and very lightweight steel. So, for example, metallurgy that relates to allowing aircraft carriers to have thinner decks, they can go faster but still handle the plane. There's all kinds of medical research as well, but they need the laboratories and the infrastructure because you don't have the endowments for that. And so I'm going to cut the cost of education for everyone. I'm going to fight to make sure the student debt crisis, which disproportionately affects African Americans, we're going to immediately forgive now. And Nancy
Amen.
Pelosi put it in, $10,000 per person in any federal student loan. As president, I'm going to double Pell Grants from $6,000 to $12,000. I'm going to have the cap on the student loan repayment. So instead of 5%, 10% of disposable income is 5% of your yearly income. I'm going to fix existing public service loan forgiveness programs. Forgive $10,000 a year for 5 years for all those and all the remaining debt after 10 years, if in fact you engage in public service. Forgive loans for any public college or private HBCU graduate making less than a family making less than $125,000 a year. Forgive the loans, wipe them out completely. College degrees shouldn't be the only path, though, to the middle class. I'm going to invest in partnerships between high schools and community college. My wife is a professor at the community college for years, and businesses so that students can earn industry credentials before they graduate. And I'm going to offer 2-year community college debt-free. Look, it's true, you can't. I guess what I'm saying is that there's so much we can do to give the African American community and HBCUs in particular an opportunity to do what they do best. Look at all the confidence you got going to an HBCU, to going to Howard. Most of my friends who I grew up with in here in town in Delaware were African Americans who became very successful. First, they get their kids get into the Harvards and the Yales and the Penns of the world. They go to HBCUs, then they go to the graduate schools that are the Ivy League or the prestigious graduate schools. So it really has a way of not only looking out for, but dealing with and encouraging and keeping African Americans in school. The last point I'll make is, my wife teaches at a predominantly minority classes in overwhelmingly, some are foreign students as well, at Northern Virginia Community College. Well, a lot of the students, you give free community colleges, I suppose, and they still can't attend because they don't have the money to be able to pay for the food, the books, the board. I mean, if they have to drive there or stay there. And so that's why I'm going to double Pell Grants from $6,000 to $12,000 to give real opportunity to people, genuine opportunity. But the HBCUs are the flagship. Everybody forgets the reason they exist. They exist because you weren't able to go to any other schools. because of prejudice, because of segregation. And so it's about time we set it right, give them the same foundation to build off of with laboratories and the like that every other major university has.
Thank you.
And thank you for your question, DeJory. And I like to hear you speaking about debt forgiveness, Mr. Vice President. That's so important, especially when we're seeing, as you spoke about, your grandkids who are graduating and coming into this this field of business now, trying to figure out what it is they're going to do, and carrying with them these loans. So it's a very important thing to focus on, because we've got to get people moving forward again, no question.
And by the way, you know, Don, it was predicted just even before this crisis that the economy was likely to slow overall because the graduates of the last 10 years and now find themselves behind the eight ball, not having the jobs they thought they were going to have and losing time with student debt. So instead of being able to go and make a down payment on a house, they got a $30,000 debt for going to a public university. I'm not talking about private universities. That's a different issue. That's a different issue. And we got to figure out we can need that help, that $10,000 help now across the board. But what happens is 85% of our economy is driven by consumption, consumers. And if this generation doesn't have the money to buy houses, buy cars, take care of their major initiatives and build, then we're not going to grow at the same rate. It's not only in the interest of the student with debt, like I graduated. I'm the first one in my family to go to college. And you know, it was a lot cheaper, but I was able to work and get through it, and pay off the debt. But anyway, my generic point is that you got to give people a shot. It's in the interest of everybody, that in fact we have more students getting degrees in the areas that we need people to grow on in, and everybody.
Absolutely. And those who are disenfranchised and hurt the most by that. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for your question, DeJory. I'd like to move on to our next panelist. This is Jamisha Harris. She is from New Bern, North Carolina, and she's an alderman, actually. So very impressed and very glad that you were here. What is your question for the Vice President, Mr.
By the way, congratulations, Alderman. I did the same thing. I became a council person, but it's the same kind of principle. But they know where you live. It's a hard job.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Jamisha Harris. I'm originally from Albany, New York, and I moved to New Bern, North Carolina in 2010. And I always wanted to be a part of something bigger than what I was. And a person that I met up with, a good friend, Talina Massey, invited me to my first NAACP meeting in New Bern. And that kind of lit the fire for me to go into my community that I represent, that I feel is marginalized, they're lacking resources. And it gave me the hope that if I run, I know that I can impact my community. So I decided to run. And in 2017, I was elected as the youngest African-American woman to serve on the Board of Aldermen for the city of New Bern. Thank you. So, and I just kind of continued from there. I started a nonprofit with my friends, Talina, Reggie, and Marquez, and it's called Young Urban Professionals. And what we do is we teach young entrepreneurs, marginalized individuals, minorities, how to start and maintain their business. I think that's very important, especially now. And I had the opportunity to look over, the things that you have out there on your agenda. And my question, because it's so important, with nonprofits needing resources, is that what are some of the action steps in your plan that you're going to be able to guarantee advancement for the economic mobility for Black people and close the racial wealth and income gaps?
Well, there's a number of things. Let me start off by saying, again, congratulations on what you do. We have something in common. I come from, I was enlisted for all the years I was a senator, the poorest man in the United States Congress. I got to the Senate. No, I'm not joking. When I did my financial disclosure as vice president, one of the folks in the press said it's probable no man has ever assumed the office of vice president with fewer assets than Joe Biden. I don't think he was talking about, I hope he wasn't talking about intellectual assets. So my generic point is that I got involved because of civil rights in the 60s. And I'm a lifetime member of the NAACP. They embraced me, and the Black church embraced me in my city. And that's how I got started. And they gave me confidence to think maybe I could do something. Maybe I could do something. And like I said, I'm the first United States senator I ever knew. I mean, I didn't, it wasn't like I didn't, anyway, the most impressive person I ever knew in terms of stature was the family doctor. I knew a banker. I didn't know a lawyer. I mean, we didn't grow up poor, but we grew up, I guess technically lower middle class. But my generic point is this. They gave me confidence. They gave me confidence that maybe I could change things and maybe change things a lot. I remember there's a film somebody did about me, and it said that had a picture of me with my mother, and my mother asking what I wanted to do when I grew up. I said, I want to be somebody. I want to make a difference. And it's like both of you guys on the screen right now. You want to make a difference. I mean, just do something worthwhile. And so, for too long, the deck's been stacked, though, against Black Americans. And today we're bearing the brunt of that, of our COVID and economic crisis in the Black community. And this crisis presents an opportunity to rebuild a stronger and more inclusive, and I think more resilient middle class. If you live in a home built by the same builder my home was built in, your home is going to be undervalued, valued less than mine. Schools are underfunded. Justice is denied. The poverty rate is still twice what it is for white Americans among Black Americans. Black workers disproportionately hold low-wage jobs without benefits and seeing the worst layoffs to today, right now. Experts predict that a disproportionate number of minority-owned businesses won't get any stimulus loans. And the automation and will displace African-American and Latino workers at higher rates than it will white workers. So my plan for African-Americans to close the wealth gap is to invest in African-American home ownership. That includes my insisting that there will be a $15,000 first-time home buyer tax credit for everyone, which means that the bank will lend you the money because they know you're going to get that down payment because it's a tax credit, no matter what you make. Doubling the funding for the Obama-Biden state small business credit. For example, we set up a $1.5 trillion private window at small business, drawing billions more, almost $30 billion of capital came in to sustain that 1.5. I double that to $3 billion a year. Support Black workers in their fight for equal pay and labor rights and safe workplaces. Address maternal mortality that disproportionately impacts African-American women, even African-American women with means. They're the last to be, you go in the emergency room, you end up being the last one waited on, last one taken care of. And so there's a lot of institutional changes we can make, but we have to provide the ability. Let me end it this way. The reason I ran for the county office, like you ran as an alderman, was to end redlining. And so when the Congress came along and the Democrats passed that $2 trillion proposal to stimulate the economy in the CARES Act, I said at the time, what's going to happen is the banks are supposed to lend to small businesses, right? Well, guess what? 40% of the money for small businesses never went there because the big banks don't, and this is cost-free to the big banks, okay? We bailed them out before, okay? They've been bailed out. They're supposed to lend the money. They weren't willing to lend money to small businesses because unless you had an account with them already, you had credit with them already, you had a credit card. That wasn't the way it's supposed to work. We have a Main Street business loan program that has billions of dollars in it. Not one penny has been loaned out yet. Not one. Not one penny. Not one. We're in a situation where what the bottom line is, we got to change and insist the way in which we deal with the African American and the Latino community is just fundamentally different, and the Asian Pacific Islander community. We have to make sure they have the same access. So, if you want to do business in the community, you got to loan in that community. You got to be engaged in that community. We can set up legislation that does that. The House is trying to do that right now. So it's all about ultimately you being able to accumulate wealth. And how do most people accumulate wealth to change their circumstance? In the housing they have, in the investment they have. And that's why I call for a multi-billion-dollar investment in housing. And because look at all the places that African Americans and poor folks are being, where neighbors are being gentrified, they can't afford the housing. They can't afford it at all. They can't afford to have a house in Los Angeles, San Francisco, suburban Chicago, parts of Philadelphia. I mean, so we've got to change the housing voucher system we have as well. No one should have to pay more than 30% in terms of what their rent is. And on top of all that, we got to change the institutional structures. I know I'm going on long, but it's so long. There's so much we can do, and I think we will do. For example, if you're a single mom working, or even if you're, I was a single dad for a while, raising 2 children. It's hard. And I was making a good salary. I was a senator. I was making $42,000 a year after my wife and daughter got killed, raising 2 boys, and I had help. I couldn't afford to have any. I couldn't have afforded any child care. I didn't have the money for it. Couldn't do it. You should have child care. We should be in a position where there should be a position where you are able to have family leave and get paid for family leave. A lot of things that can change the quality of life for people and put them in a position where they're not the ones that have to go out and do that $5 an hour job and leave their kids behind, et cetera. There's a lot we can do, and with your help, we're going to get it done. I really mean, I'm confident the American people have finally, the Band-Aid's been ripped off. They've seen the people doing all the work for us, and a lot of them are saying, I didn't know that. I didn't know they had to do that. Now's the time to strike while we have a chance.
I actually like to ask Jamisha a question, and hope it's not putting you on the spot too much, but if it is, forgive me. Can you speak a little bit to everyone who is really focused on just, presidential election that comes along every 4 years and forgets all of the down ballot voting that's necessary, and being an alderwoman and being a council person, and how important that is, and how these elections matter?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question, because I am grassroots. I am always vocal. Anytime I have the platform to speak to anyone, I let them know how important their vote is, because local elections affect you so much. Your taxes, your roads, county elections. It's so important for you to, I don't care, about not necessarily about the candidates. I'm saying, what party, because I'm always vocal about, making sure you know who your candidate is, but just make sure you know the policies, the platforms that they're running on, because it affects you. Your taxes will go up. If we do utility bills. So people really, 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 really need to understand that it is so important to vote in every election, but even in your local election, because your alderman is going to be the one that represents you and is the voice for you on that board to make sure that those funds are being allocated justly. And me, I represent the 2nd ward. It's the minority ward. And I wanted to make sure that those funds were being allocated properly to my, minorities, because we've always been on the back burner. And now it's time to be able to make sure that there's things in place, policies in place that will uplift us and build our communities. So please, please vote. Voting is so important in your local election.
God love you. You're absolutely positive. You affect the quality of life of people in your district more than the senator does, whomever he or she is. I mean, you really do. Yes. It matters.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate you allowing me to frame that for you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Vice President, for your answer. And now I would like to move this to Keith James. He's from Wilmington, Delaware. He's a civil rights activist. And Keith, what is your question for the Vice President?
First and foremost, thank you, Mr. Vice President, for allowing me to be here with you tonight. It's wonderful to see you again. As Don said, my name is Keith James. As we spoke about on Sunday at Bethel AME here in Wilmington, our city and state want to be heard. We've been conducting civil negotiations with our elected officials to bring peace and policy changes to our great state. From body cameras to police oversight committees, and even revisiting and looking to change some of the language used in our police use of force laws. We as a state are committed to change. My question for you this evening is, if elected, how will you address systemic racial issues as it pertains to the criminal justice system and police to community interactions?
Well, first of all, I want to tell you about this young guy. He is a very talented fellow. My daughter is a social worker. My daughter ran the criminal justice reform operation here in Delaware. She has her master's in work, and Keith wrote a really good book, and she's so honored, and so am I. He dedicated to her, to Ashley Biden. And I want to thank you for doing that. You got it right. You figured out who the really smart Biden in the family is. It's Ashley. No, I really mean it. So thank you. Now, look, Keith, here's the deal. The federal government can do a lot to affect policy at a local level, but it ultimately is affected at the local level. It's ultimately affected. I know you're running for the Senate, and you know a couple of folks who work with me as well are now sitting senators in the African American community. And I, as a federal official, cannot tell the state that it can or cannot do certain things. For example, of all the people behind bars in the United States of America, 93 out of 100 are behind a county prison bar or a state prison bar. And so what Barack and I did, we worked like hell to get 39,000 people out of federal prisons. And what I'm proposing is we provide for incentives to get the states to reduce their prison populations. For example, no one should be going to jail for a drug abuse problem. They should be going into mandatory rehab. That's why I wrote the bill that required that there be drug courts. We don't need to build more prisons. We need to build more drug rehab facilities, mandatory rehab facilities, because drug is a problem, and it's a problem for the person who has the addiction. 2, we should make sure that when anybody gets out of jail, we can't dictate this. We can do this for for federal prisons, but I'm going to try to incentivize states to do it by giving them extra money. Anyone who in fact gets out of prison and is served their time should automatically be eligible for every program that exists in the federal government. Right now, they can't get a Pell Grant to go to school. Right now, they can't get public housing. Right now, they can't go. I go down the list. They're denied every single thing. And I've made these speeches in the Gold Ballroom to the big high-paying business guys. I tell them it's in their interest that we pay money and our taxes to see to it that someone can be rehabilitated. Right now, all that happens is you get out of prison, you get a $25, you get $25 and you get a bus ticket. You end up under the 3rd Street Bridge. That's what happens. But if you're able to come out and qualify to go on and get a student loan to go because you qualified to go for free to Dell State or to community college or wherever you are able to get into, and you can get Pell Grants at $12,000 a year, you can begin to build your life. If you qualify for, and we also should be in a position where anyone convicted, for example, of a marijuana conviction, automatically that should be expunged. So when you get asked a question, have you ever been convicted? You can honestly say no, because you have to put it down now on a job application. Right. There's a whole range of things we could be doing. Why does it not make sense that since we know one thing that all criminals have, quote unquote, convicted people have in common that go to jail on balance, regardless of their race, is they're not very good readers, they don't have much of an education, and they tend to, if they're violent criminals, have come from a family where they were physically abused or they saw their mother abused. Why does it not make sense to deal with those problems while they are in prison? Why not have drug rehab in prison if it's another crime for which you went, but you have a drug problem? That's not why you're there. Why does it not make sense? I think you may have helped Ashley try to get the provision passed where she got the criminal justice outfit to buy a tire store, train people in prison to know how to change and fix tires, retread tires. Buy the facility, the state buy the facility, Train them while they are there so they have a job waiting for them when they get out. Why don't we do that? We're spending money the wrong way. We shouldn't be building any more prisons. And that's why I opposed the provision in a bill that I had passed that provided more money for state prisons. No more federal prisons, state prisons. We should end all mandatory sentences. It makes no sense. And so there's a lot of things we can do, and we can do it now. But I know you know this because I know your activity. I know your interest. And keep it going. Keep it going. Because I tell you, no, I really mean it. You can change things. You can genuinely change things. The truth is we can't afford to wait. The country needs solutions now, and the problems that exist now, I urge the Congress to take these actions immediately. I urge young guys like you to get involved and start at a state level the same thing. It's the same thing. There's so much more to say, but I've already said too much. And can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
What do you most get asked about in the community now? I met you down the east side at Bethel with Reverend Beeman. I've seen you before. You know, it's one of my old haunts that I remember. When you're together with people your age in the neighborhood, what are they talking about now? I mean, for real, practically, not generically. Just, you know, what concerns them most?
To be honest with you, they ask me questions like, do you really think you can bring change or change this system? And I respond to them, yes, because people like your daughter, Ashley, who took me under her wing. And one of the things she told me was, write a book you will want to read. And that's why I dedicated it to her. People like the JJ Francis's of the world, who just help us to be better as a community. So I answered yes to them each and every time they asked me that. But it's hard for them to see it because our system has been broken for some time. And I understand that, and I understand why they have distrust in the system. But it's my responsibility and my commitment to make sure that we restore hope in our communities. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Because you see what happens when the system breaks down.
Yes, sir.
This guy deliberately broke the system. He thinks government is bad, Trump. The reason it doesn't work, he thinks it isn't designed to work. He doesn't know how to make it work. It's all about breaking it down. And it started with the Reagan era. Government is bad. Your problem is government. Well, let me tell you, wealthy people don't need government to protect them. But poor folks, white, black, all colors, all backgrounds, they need the government to protect them. Otherwise, they get taken advantage of. It's just about power. The ultimate sin, my dad used to say, the greatest sin of all is the abuse of power. Abuse of power, whether it's economic power, political power, or physical power. It's the abuse of power. And that's why we need young men like you and young women on this call to be engaged in the politics of changing what's happening in the street. It really does matter. Now, look, I don't want to paint this all rosy. Let me conclude by saying, look, the act of protesting should never be allowed to overshadow the reason for the protest. The act of protesting should never be allowed to overshadow the reason for the protest in the first place. And what I worry about tomorrow night in Wilmington, for example, there's a lot of really good people. I'm going to be out. I'm not going to be here. I'm going to be up in Pennsylvania. But tomorrow night, what I worry a little bit about is you and many others are going to be out there protesting legitimately for change. But we can't allow the protesting to overshadow the purpose of the protest. So there's going to be a lot of folks who are going to want to cause trouble. Some cops, but some folks too. And so it's going to take young leaders like you to begin to change things in the city again and get re-engaged in the city. An awful lot of people, Don, did very well. The guys I grew up with, everyone from Lafayette Jackson to Spencer Henry, all these guys who I grew up with became very successful what they did. But what's happened is that the last two mayors ago, African-American mayors we've had, have called me and said, Joe, whenever there was a problem before, every major successful African-American businessman would be in my office, seeing what they can do to help. Problem is, you tell them, they're not in the office anymore, a lot of them.
Yes, sir.
They're not being brought back in because they've said, I'm not, I've got other things I got to do. But now you have young leaders like are occurring like you and others that I met with, including dealing with, not just the NAACP, with guys like been around a while like Mouse, but also dealing with, the new guys that are coming up and dealing with, new organizations. And I feel something's changing here. We're starting to move again. And,
Yes, sir.
and I think you're going to be part of that.
Yes, sir. You have my commitment that that we're going to do everything we can to keep the peace tomorrow. I trust the leadership that's out there. I trust the leadership of our police department and of our mayor and of our governor. So we're going to do everything in our power to keep the peace. And I'm sure we're going to have a great night and policy changes coming soon.
As a friend of mine used to say, from your lips to God's ears.
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you very much for your question, Keith. And I would just like to thank all of you for being here and everyone who's watching. This is important. I hope this is not the last time that you convene a panel in this way, that we have young people who can ask their questions directly to the Vice President. And we can look forward to engagement like this as we move toward November and obviously beyond, irrespective of what happens, although I know everyone on this call hopes for one eventual outcome. We have to keep pushing no matter what. So I want to say thank you to Nyla, thank you to Ryan, thank you to Jory, thank you to Jamisha, thank you, Keith, and of course, thank you, Vice President, for being here, and thank you all for convening, and keep fighting, stay safe. We have a long way to go. Any closing words, Mr. Vice President?
Well, Don, I do a lot of these meetings like this, and with your permission, I'll contact you and see if we can get you to do more of this. But we have these, we call them roundtable discussions, from everything from first responders to women in the community to dealing with whatever the issues are, to have them tell me what their problems are. And sometimes, with good reason, they're angry. They don't think that I've proposed enough to get things done, and they may be right. But what I found is I learn from them. What I find is that there is an emerging new sense of the need to be engaged, to be involved, to be to make things just a little bit better. And we can make it a lot better. Because I really do think, Don, I'll conclude by saying, when I was coming up as a kid, I'm not making myself out to be any great civil rights guy or big hero, but I used to, we desegregate movie theaters. And anyway, I was no big player. But I remember at a time in the when Bull Connor down in Birmingham, and you know a lot about this because you helped my buddy in Alabama win. American people heard about how African Americans were treated and lynchings and all the things that were talked about back then. But people who lived in communities where there weren't any African Americans just didn't really believe that stuff happened. I mean, they thought it, but they didn't see it. And Bull Connor thought he was going to stake a wooden stake in the heart of the civil rights movement when he sigged those dogs on those African-American women in their Sunday best going to church, ripping skin off them with the fire hoses, having dogs to go after the kids and the like. And what happened then? As Dr. King said, paraphrasing, it awakened the nation like, oh my God, this really happens? This really happens? We ended up with the Civil Rights Act. We ended up with the Voting Rights Act. It was a change because people around the country who aren't bad people, but they're not engaged, said, I understand that. But when they saw it, it radicalized them into saying, we got to act. And it worked. I think that what Donald Trump has done and what was happened in a 8-minute, and I think it's 47 seconds with a white cop's knee on the neck of a guy smashed against a curb. I think it's like, oh my God. Oh my God. We see it in direct color. It's technicolor. They're looking at it, saying, oh my God, I can't breathe. And the country now is having trouble breathing. They're angry. And I think they're ready to move. And we have to change the institutional structures. Everything from police brutality, racism writ large, but also the things that make life better for people. Access to health care, everybody. Access to daycare, access to education, access. To begin to rebuild a community and give people a shot. Anyway, I'm sorry, but I feel pretty passionate about it. And again, if I have the passion, I can only imagine how you feel. I can only imagine how you feel.
Well, we hope to be able to use the passion to organize a better way forward. And hopefully when we have a new president in the White House who shares that passion that we have and that anger and that unrest, we can find ways to use the alchemy of the system where it is and where it can be to get some of this legislation passed that will start to break down these systematic and institutionalized structures that have brought us so much pain for so long.
You may remember when they asked me to campaign down in Alabama, they said, what do you want Biden in Alabama for? Okay? Well, guess what? We're going to win back the United States Senate. We have to win the United States Senate back.
Absolutely.
Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, Arizona, places we hadn't been able to compete before. We're going to win back the United States Senate. That's going to change the ability of the next president to be able to make real change.
From your lips, as someone said, from your lips to God's ear.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And we'll do this again, team, I promise you.
Well, thank you. We're going to hold you to that.
Oh, guaranteed.
All right.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you all tonight. This has been a great conversation, and I look forward to having many more. Everybody stay safe out there.
Social distance and wear your masks.
Wear your masks. Wash your hands. Don't touch your nose.